Hi, welcome back. I grew up watching a ton of international soccer, or football as it's called outside the US, and Diego Maradona was one of my idols growing up. I vaguely remember him lifting the World Cup trophy, so I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Argentina. But today we'll talk about the economic aspect of things. A prominent economist once said there are four kinds of countries in the world: developed countries, undeveloped countries, Japan, and Argentina. In the early 20th century, Argentina was among the world's wealthiest nations, boasting a strong agricultural sector and a robust export-oriented economy. During this period, Argentina experienced rapid industrialization, urbanization, and economic growth, driven largely by its abundant natural resources and favorable trade conditions. By the 1920s, Argentina had the world's seventh highest per capita income, and its capital, Buenos Aires, was considered the Paris of South America. And yet, as of today, no country owes the IMF more than Argentina does. The decline of Argentina from its position as one of the world's wealthiest nations a century ago to its current state of economic instability has been the subject of considerable analysis. However, there doesn't seem to be much consensus amongst economists as to exactly why. The general assessment seems to be that there might be a combination of three factors for Argentina's difficulties: the lack of modernization, the impact of trade policies, and the absence of effective institutions to drive economic policies. Argentina has long had issues with economic instability marked by significant fluctuations in its exchange rate, high inflation, and the emergence of a parallel black market for foreign currency. In recent years, the official dollar-RG exchange rate has experienced considerable volatility, with the peso depreciating from around 25 pesos per dollar in June 2018 to 227 pesos currently. But wait, there's more. The black market exchange rate, often referred to as the blue dollar rate, has deviated substantially from the official exchange rate, reaching as high as 495 pesos to the dollar. It shows that there is a process of dollarization happening in the country. And once that dynamic starts taking hold, it is very difficult to reverse or control. Additionally, the wider the spread between the official and blue dollar rates gets, the higher the probability of a currency devaluation. Argentina has also faced persistently high inflation rates, with the most recent year-over-year inflation rate of 104% in March, meaning that prices in Argentina were 104% higher than they were in March last year. Inflation affects the poorest of society the most because they typically spend a larger portion of their assets on essentials like food and energy, whereas the wealthier members of society can invest in either hard assets, the stock market, or foreign currency. This dynamic has largely been driven by Argentina's fiscal imbalances, as evidenced by a budget deficit of 4.5% of GDP in 21 and public debt reaching 85% of GDP. Now remember, take these numbers in the context of the fact that unlike the United States and European countries, Argentina has limited ability to issue peso-denominated debt. It typically issues bonds denominated in hard currencies such as US dollar or euro. The primary reason for this is that foreign investors do not want to invest in bonds denominated in a currency with a history of high inflation and significant exchange rate fluctuations, as they would face higher currency risk. This practice exposes the Argentine government to currency risk, as it needs to generate sufficient forex reserves to repay the debt in the designated currency. There are three main theories as to why Argentina is in a perpetual state of crisis. The first theory is that despite its early prosperity, Argentina's economy in the early 20th century was not as modern as those of other advanced economies. The nation's wealth was primarily derived from its agricultural sector, with relatively little emphasis on industrial development and technological innovation. This lack of diversification and modernization made it difficult for Argentina to adapt to shocks and to compete. When external shocks such as the Great Depression and subsequent fluctuations in commodity prices hit the global economy, Argentina struggled to respond effectively. Its lack of a modern and diversified industrial base made it more sensitive to economic downturns, as it could not rely on other sectors to offset the decline in agricultural exports. The inability to adjust to changing global economic conditions and to foster innovation and productivity in general was hindered by Argentina's long-term economic performance. The second theory emphasizes the role of trade policy in Argentina's economic decline. After the Great Depression, Argentina pursued a policy of import substitution industrialization, or ISI, in an effort to boost its domestic industries and reduce reliance on exports. While ISI led to some initial industrial growth, it also fostered economic inefficiencies, protectionism, and an insular economic outlook. Over time, Argentina's trade policies hindered its ability to integrate with the global economy and compete in international markets. By focusing on domestic industries and limiting imports, Argentina missed opportunities to integrate itself in the global value chains that have driven growth and development in other countries. This isolation has contributed to the nation's lack of competitiveness and its vulnerability to external shocks. Thirdly, Argentina has struggled with weak economic institutions and a lack of a coherent framework for dealing with and implementing successful policies. The country's political landscape has been characterized by frequent changes in government, policy reversals, and confrontational politics, which have created an environment of uncertainty and hindered long-term planning. When Argentina needed to adapt to changing global economic conditions and address its structural economic issues, it lacked the institutions and political consensus necessary to drive successful reforms. This has resulted in a series of policy missteps such as persistent fiscal imbalances, high inflation, and recurrent debt crises. Furthermore, weak rule of law and corruption have undermined investor confidence, discouraged both domestic and foreign investment, and contributed to Argentina's economic decline. In the context of Argentina's recurring economic challenges, it is crucial to distinguish between state policies and government policies, especially given the policy whiplash that occurs as political administrations change. State policies refer to long-term strategic guidance that transcends individual governments and is designed to provide a consistent framework for the country's development. In contrast, government policies are the specific measures and initiatives implemented by a particular administration, often reflecting their political ideologies and priorities. Argentina's economic troubles can be, to a significant extent, attributed to a lack of cohesive state policies, which has led to a policy whiplash between successive administrations. The absence of a long-term consistent policy framework has resulted in short-term, politically motivated decisions that often prove to be unsustainable in the long run, creating an environment of uncertainty and volatility. There are three factors to consider here: frequent changes in government, military coups, and the rise of populist political movements. Argentina's political history has been characterized by a series of short-lived governments, with power frequently changing hands between different political parties. These rapid shifts in power have made it difficult to implement long-term economic policies, as new administrations often reverse the policies of their predecessors, creating a lack of continuity and a sense of unpredictability for businesses and investors. For example, in the 1990s, under President Carlos Menem, Argentina pursued a series of market-oriented reforms, including the privatization of state-owned enterprises and the liberalization of trade and capital flows. However, these policies were later reversed under the administration of Nestor Kirchner and his wife Cristina de Kirchner, who implemented more interventionist policies, including the nationalization of key industries and increased protectionism. Argentina has experienced several military coups in its history. These coups have often led to periods of authoritarian rule, which have further destabilized the political environment and hampered the country's democratic development. The most notable example is the 1976 coup, which resulted in a brutal military dictatorship that lasted until 1983. The dictatorship's repressive policies and human rights abuses not only caused immense social and political upheaval, but also contributed to economic stagnation and growing external debt. Argentina has seen the emergence of populist political movements that have had a long-lasting impact on its political landscape, most notably something called Peronism. Founded by Juan Perón, former military officer, Peronism is characterized by its focus on social welfare, nationalism, and state interventionism in the economy. While Peronist economic policies initially led to economic growth, over time they contributed to fiscal imbalances, high inflation, and a lack of competitiveness in the global market. For instance, during the presidencies of Nestor Kirchner and Cristina de Kirchner, the government implemented a series of populist policies including price controls, currency restrictions, and a nationalization of key industries. While these measures were initially popular, they ultimately led to distortions in the economy, increased corruption, and a loss of investor confidence. Energy subsidies have long been a critical component of Argentina's fiscal problems, contributing significantly to the country's fiscal deficit and creating market distortions. These subsidies, which include financial support to energy producers and maintaining low electricity, natural gas, and fuel prices for consumers, have consistently been a point of contention in negotiations with the IMF. The IMF has advocated for a more targeted approach to subsidies, focusing on protecting the poor and promoting energy efficiency and conservation. For example, in 2018, the IMF approved a $50 billion bailout package for Argentina, which included provisions to gradually reduce energy subsidies over 3 years. However, implementing subsidy reforms has proven politically sensitive, as successive governments have faced public opposition and protests over subsidy reductions. Despite IMF recommendations, Argentina has struggled to balance fiscal consolidation and the potential social and economic impacts of subsidy reforms. In 2019, following the IMF's guidance, the Argentine government reduced electric and gas subsidies, resulting in a sharp increase in utility prices. This move sparked public protests and widespread discontent, highlighting the challenges policymakers face in navigating the delicate balance between fiscal responsibility and social stability. Argentina's interaction with the IMF dates back to the 1950s, when the country first became a member. Over the years, the IMF has provided financial support to Argentina during several crises, including the hyperinflation of the late 1980s and the debt crisis of 2001. The fund has also played a role in more recent economic challenges, such as the 2018 currency crisis and the ongoing debt restructuring negotiations. As a side note, I just want to mention the distinction between the role of the IMF to that of the World Bank. The IMF mainly deals with macroeconomic and financial stability issues. It provides short to medium-term financial assistance and policy advice to countries facing significant difficulties. The World Bank, on the other hand, focuses on long-term development projects and broader challenges such as poverty reduction, environmental sustainability, etc. Now I want to give you some key events and IMF interventions. In the late 1980s, Argentina faced a period of hyperinflation, which led to a severe economic crisis. The IMF stepped in with financial assistance and policy guidance, including the implementation of a stabilization plan focused on fiscal consolidation and monetary restraint. The plan helped curb inflation, but it also resulted in a sharp recession and increased unemployment. Argentina's most significant financial crisis occurred in December 2001, when the country defaulted on its sovereign debt, leading to a deep economic contraction and social unrest. The IMF provided emergency financing and demanded the implementation of austerity measures, including cuts to public spending and the devaluation of the Argentine peso. While these measures helped stabilize the economy, they also had significant social costs, leading to widespread poverty and unemployment. In response to a currency crisis in 2018, Argentina secured a $57 billion loan from the IMF, the largest in the fund's history. The loan came with conditions, including fiscal consolidation, monetary tightening, and structural reforms. While the loan helped stabilize the currency and financial markets, it also led to a deep recession and growing public discontent with IMF-backed policies, specifically a reduction of energy subsidies. IMF-backed policies in Argentina have often been controversial, with critics arguing that they prioritize financial stability over social welfare and exacerbate existing inequalities. Key concerns include austerity measures, loss of sovereignty, and ineffectiveness. IMF-imposed austerity measures, such as cuts to public spending and wage freezes, have often been met with resistance due to their perceived negative impact on the poor. Critics argue that these measures disproportionately impact low-income households and contribute to rising poverty and unemployment. Many Argentines view IMF interventions as an infringement on their country's sovereignty, with policymakers being forced to implement externally imposed policies that may not align with the nation's best interests. Critics argue that IMF-backed policies have failed to deliver long-term economic stability in Argentina, with the country experiencing recurrent crises despite the fund's interventions. Argentina has one of the largest deposits of lithium in the world. I didn't mention it in this presentation because it started to run too long, but it is something I'll revisit in the near future. Argentina has vast amounts of lithium in the northwest of the country, but in my opinion, they're very unlikely to reap any major windfalls from it. There are reasons for that, but that presentation is for another day. As we think about Argentina's economic situation, it's hard not to be puzzled by the government's continued support for energy subsidies, even though they're taking a toll on the nation's fiscal well-being. It makes you wonder if short-term political gains are being prioritized over long-term economic stability. For Argentina to build a sustainable future, it's important to face this issue and work towards solutions that align with the country's overall economic objectives and not short-term thinking. So let's hope that Argentina can strike the right balance, make the necessary policy reforms, and set itself on a path towards stability. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.